So welcome everybody to part 4 of the board game design course, creating better games. So we're going to go straight into what part 4 is today, which is self-publishing or working with a publisher. So this is really looking at all the different hidden costs that are involved when you're looking at self-publishing, which is essentially going the Kickstarter route completely and trying to put everything out yourself. This isn't to say that there aren't publishers that go the Kickstarter route. We ourselves actually go Kickstarter as an initial sales channel for a lot of our games. But generally, you're going to be going Kickstarter or a different crowdfunding platform if you're planning on putting it out yourself. So there's a lot of hidden costs involved in that a lot of people aren't even aware of initially when they're planning out how to put out a game. There's a lot of different information out there for when you're planning on self-publishing, and a lot of it falls into general themes. So because there's so much information that's out there on a lot of different aspects of the topic already, I won't be focusing on those aspects today. Instead, what I'll be focusing on is the common issues that a lot of people seem to overlook when they're planning on self-publishing, which comes down to all the additional costs that they weren't planning on when they were going forward and trying to do this. So last week, 2 weeks ago actually, we had some homework, and it was a 4-part homework. So the first part was, what is the feel needed for your game? So if you might remember, the last one, part 3, was going over artwork. So the feel needed for your game, this is going to affect not just the mechanics that you're going to be incorporating in. You might be having a mechanic specifically put in to make players feel rushed, if that's a feel that you need for the game. But it'll also affect the art style that's going to happen. The mood that your players should have when playing. So again, you don't want dark and brooding artwork when it's a light and fluffy style game. You want to make sure that the mood of the artwork matches the game style that you're designing. The next 2, though, are specifically for today, and for what we're going to be going over today. And that would be, what would be a 3-sentence description of your game? So if anyone is interested in sharing the description of your game, just let me know in the chat window here, and we'll do a quick thing going over the description of your game. And then, what do you estimate the production cost of your prototype to be? So this being a guess. So the point of this one is to give you an idea of where you think it's going to be based on all the information you might have found up till now. And then we're going to be taking a deep dive into that today so that you can see where your comparison of where you believe production costs are going to be lie in relation to what the actuality of production costs will actually be. Okay, so we have one volunteer here for telling us about the 3-sentence description of your game. So when you're ready, Laura.
Sure. More potions, more powers, and more problems. In this expansion to Potions Please, a set collection game, in Cauldron College, you are college students trying to complete classes, secure electives, and working to be the most successful student.
Excellent. Thank you. Now that is going to be a perfect example for a 3-sentence description that we'll be able to look at later on tonight as we get into the different parts of what you need when you're preparing things for either going the self-publishing route or going and talking with a publisher, because this is something that you're going to need either way. And we're going to look at why and what that actually means in relation to that in a few minutes here. So keep in mind the description that Laura just said. And if you're willing, Laura, I'll ask you to say it out again when we get to another part here in just a few minutes. And
sure. I'm going to type it out so that way I can just pop it in, so that way I can repeat it.
It sounds good. Okay. So self-publishing versus licensing, where to start? So no matter how you're planning on putting your game out, there are some common ground that you need to start with, a place that you need to be at regardless of where you're going to be going. So first off, wasn't supposed to happen. So first off, is your game complete and fun? You're not the measure of this. Your playtesters are. So if your playtesters feel that the game is complete and fun, then it's at a point where it actually is complete and fun. This is going to be something that you're very close to when you're designing it. And so you may feel that it's not complete yet. There's so much more you want to do, but your playtesters are telling you that it is complete. The other thing, you may at times think that this is a really fun game the way you've designed it, but your playtesters might still be telling you it's not. So your playtesters are actually your measuring stick for when the game is complete and when the game is fun. So have you figured out an exact component list? So this is going to be exactly what your game has to have to be printed. So this includes every single little item that goes into the game, no matter what that may be. Maybe you'd need a couple glass beads, and you're like, oh, people can use anything for it. No, that's an item that has to be in the game. You never ask people to find other items. You always include every single item that's needed in the box. Do you have setup and play pictures? So this is going to be something you need whether you're advertising it yourself, whether you're describing it to people, when you're setting up your sell sheet, all of these kinds of things, you need to be able to show people, publishers, whatever, what the game really is. So you need to have it at a point where you can show these. If you're showing it to a publisher, obviously it doesn't have to be as high quality as what you're planning on showing to customers. Do you have a hook? So does anyone know what a hook might be? Okay, so a hook is your 3-sentence description of your game that makes people want to play it. So this is one of the important things about having a 3-sentence description of your game. It needs to not only describe your game, it also needs to make sure that people want to play it. So if it's just technical information, that's not fun. So you have to make sure that when you're coming up with a hook for your game, that it's fun, that makes people interested in the game and makes people want to play it. Where are you going to use your hook? Well, first off, in your sell sheet. You're also going to use it when you're describing it to people quickly. When you're talking about it in the brief description of the Kickstarter that you set up if you're going self-publishing, when you're talking about it initially with a publisher. The hook is really going to be the key bit of information that no matter who you're talking to is going to get them interested in your game. So what is a sell sheet? So first off, it's a single page. It's not going over into multiple pages. The biggest thing about a sell sheet is it's quick information. It contains all your basic information about your game, so estimated age rating, play time, player count, and something very important with this. Estimated age rating. If you're talking to a publisher, this can be exactly how young you actually feel people could play the game. But if you're planning on self-publishing, this is 14 plus, no exceptions. And we'll get into why later on. So your hook. You need to get people interested in it right off the bat in the first 3 sentences of what they're reading. A very brief description. So this is going more in depth than your hook, giving more information about the game, quick play information about it, different things like that. But again, not going into very much detail, very, very brief. A component list. So when people open the box, what are they going to see? This is very important for publishers to know exactly what they're getting into initially. If you're self-publishing, it's very important for game stores to know exactly how much space this is going to take up on their shelf. Pictures of the game. People need to know what it is you're telling them about. This is actually one of the most important parts of a sell sheet. Describe it through pictures. I have seen hundreds of sell sheets, and you would be surprised at how many people forget pictures or put pictures that don't relate in any way to describing the game. Make sure the pictures are descriptive of what the game itself is, and if at all possible, use the pictures to describe the game. To cut down on the amount of words. The less words you have on the sell sheet, the less of a wall of text that people are reading through, the more likely they are to actually read the entire thing. So, self-publishing. So we're going to start with self-publishing. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a warning. Some of this information may be a little overwhelming at first. And it may make you feel that this is not even a possible route. That's not actually the intention of this. This is designed to help give you a better idea of the costing structures that are actually involved and where a lot of Kickstarters and self-publishers fail because they have forgotten some very important costs that they didn't account for. So, first off, if you're going to be self-publishing, you need someone to manufacture. So the best place to find out who a good manufacturer is online groups. Ask other designers and other publishers who they use as manufacturers, what they think of them, why they like them, why they don't like them. And try and get a list of at least 3 companies that you feel you'd be willing to work with. Keep in mind that some companies, they will be recommended to you because they have absolutely amazing quality. Absolutely amazing quality will come with a higher cost. So don't just focus on what the absolute best that everyone says is. Get a list of at least 3 and try and get quotes from each of them. You can also request samples from them. Sample kits are usually fairly small. You will have to pay the shipping for them, but it'll give you a reference point for the kinds of quality that you can be looking for. You always have to keep in mind that a sample kit will be considered one of their highest quality things. They are making it as a sample for publishers or for independent publishers to be able to say, hey, I want to work with you. So they will be putting a lot of extra effort into making sure it looks the best, even though it's such a small thing. So always keep that in mind when you're looking at a sample. When you request quotes, request itemized quotes. So an itemized quote is once you've submitted all the items that are needed in your quote request, you want them to break it out by line on the quote form. So for instance, if you have 5 punch boards in your game that you're going to be making, you want to have a line saying 5 punch boards and the price of that on your quote. The reason being that this is exceptionally helpful for allowing you to set up the pricing points for stretch goals. It also gives you the chance to directly compare between manufacturing companies what the actual price differences are in the quotes that you're getting. Sometimes it's going to be only on very specific products that the pricing difference is going to be. Sometimes it's going to be on everything as a whole. So it's good to know why there's a price difference going on, and that'll give you a better chance to judge whether or not this is the right company for you. Request CE or CN71 testing. So we're going to get into what that is in just a few minutes here. Purchase a barcode and a SKU reference. Again, we're going to get into what that is in just a few minutes here. And inquire about DDU or DDP shipping and or ask for a recommended shipping company. So all of these last 3 points here, we're going to be going into more in depth. The reason being that, well, there's a lot of information on different things you need for manufacturing, different things you need on the box. These are the things that are often forgotten. And when they're forgotten, they can create bigger issues for you down the road. So first off, required markings. So pretty much everyone knows that on a board game, you need the play time. You need the age, recommended age for the game. You need the number of players. You need the company that made it. You need the person who designed the game. All these sorts of things. Those are basic bits of information that most people just know at this point in time. But there's a lot more than that that's needed on a game box. So, CE or CN71. These are the same thing. This is a test that the manufacturer will do for you. It will cost you money, about between $600 and $1,000 US. But what this does is it allows you to sell in Europe. If you have not done this test, you cannot legally sell this game in Europe. There are a lot of Kickstarters that try and get around this by essentially saying that instead of the games being a purchased item, that they're a gift. This has a lot of legal issues associated with it, though. The other thing is, okay, your Kickstarter is done. You've got 300 games left over. If you don't have this done, there's absolutely no way that you can sell them in Europe at all. Something else though that happens, even if you you don't put them on and you're only planning on fulfilling to Europe for the Kickstarter, not selling other than that, you've heard of other people managing to send their games to Europe, no issues without this. Here's what one of the biggest issues can be. If Customs decides to open the package and sees these markings are not there on the game, they will flag all packages entering that specific country from you. And they will open every single one of them to see if they have that marking on them. And if they don't, they will send them back. So it's not worth the risk of not getting the test done. So barcodes. People sometimes forget that a barcode might be something that's needed. Thing is, if you plan on attempting anything with retail or with Amazon or anything like that, barcodes are 100% needed. Amazon won't even look at you if you don't have a barcode on your product. And a barcode has to be purchased because it has to be unique. That being said, there is the standard way of buying them that is very expensive, or you can buy them cheaply from a place like Easy UPC. How it works from Easy UPC is these are barcodes that have been retired. So they were already purchased at their full value. The company that purchased them has declared that it no longer needs or will use these barcodes, and they're put onto a secondary market. They're perfectly legal to use still, but they're a lot cheaper. And then SKU reference. So if you want to sell your game in any game store, you must have this. So a SKU reference, I'm just bringing up the laser pointer here. SKU reference is the first 3 digits of the SKU number here. What this does is it's a identifier code specifically for you or specifically for your company. It allows game stores to go to a distributor, type in those 3 digits, and bring up all of your games listed. It makes it really easy for them to buy, and no distributor will even touch you without it. And most game stores prefer to buy directly through distributors. That is slowly changing, but it's still going to be quite a while before these SKU reference numbers are not needed. They're going to be needed for years yet. They're not very expensive to get. However, they won't necessarily be available for exactly the code you want. For instance, we have the code OMG for OOMM Games. The code OMG was actually already taken by another company. However, the company had gone out of business 3 years before we launched OOMM Games. As such, we were able to submit that information to the registrar, and they allowed us to take over the OMG SKU reference. So that's one of the things, if you have a specific SKU reference you would really like to have, you can do your research and see if that company has gone defunct. So before we go on to shipping though, does anyone have any questions regarding the back of the box? One thing I'll just point out here, you'll notice on this little reference here that we have address information and website information. That is actually a required part of the EN71 as well. So to be able to sell in a store, you do have to have a store in Europe. You do have to have website information and a address information for them to be able to physically contact you at. Okay, so shipping. Shipping is not cheap, just to put it simply. This is going to be something that a lot of people underestimate at first. And the reason being is that a lot of people don't realize where they should be calculating this in to everything when they're properly trying to cost stuff out. So first off, inquire about DDU or DDP shipping. So what are those? So DDU, delivery duty unpaid. So you'll be paying customs directly for the import fees and all of that, but everything else will be handled through the shipping company or through the manufacturer. Generally, it's going to be through the shipping company. There's only a few manufacturers that actually handle the shipping for you as well. So if DDU is delivery duty unpaid, DDP is delivery duty paid. So they take care of getting through customs and the import fees and everything for you. You're only paying a single bill. So this is actually very, very important because when the bill for customs and import comes in is usually actually a few months after the product has arrived. So if you're not planning for the import fees and custom fees and everything, this will come as a surprise when you get the bill in the mail later on. So you need to plan for these extra fees because one way or another you will be paying for them. And if you're quoted a DDU rate, it will not have anything regarding these fees on them. So you will need to do the research and look that up yourself as to what the import fees are going to be. Most shipping companies would prefer to do DDU. There's very few that actually do DDP. DDP is in general just more expensive. If you can find someone that will do it at a reasonable price though, then that will be more helpful for you in the long run. So shipping rates should be included in your calculated manufacturing cost. So this is everything from leaving the port to arriving at your warehouse. Every fee that's included in there. And one of the things that this includes as well is the insurance fee for the transport itself. You've spent a lot of money getting these games made. You're going to want to make sure they're insured. Insurance doesn't usually cost that much, and it realistically only covers things if the ship goes down. But on the off chance that something happens and you don't get the insurance, you are completely out all of that. You can also do a lot of shipping arrangements as partial containers. So normally a print run of between 1,000 or 2,500 games, anywhere in there, is not going to actually take up a lot of space in a shipping container. So you'll want to try and make arrangements for a partial container load because this will cost you a lot less in the long run. Even with that though, it's still going to cost you around $5,000 for just the shipping part. So why should this be included in your manufacturing cost? Does anyone have an idea? We have a pretty quiet group today. Okay, so the reason this should be included in your manufacturing cost is because when you, yes, it's an expense you have to pay, but it's an expense that you have to pay from the moment that you send it to the factory to the moment that it arrives ready for shipping. So essentially, anything that's included in your manufacturing costs should include from the moment you send it out to be printed to the moment you have it ready to be shipped. That is your total manufacturing cost. So that's the total cost of getting it to the point of being in the customer's hands, almost. So how should you price your games? You have to keep in mind that the quote you get is going to have a per unit cost, and it may have additional costs listed on it. Those will not be reflected in the per unit cost. So for instance, the mold cost for minis. Making molds are expensive. So if you have any minis, if you have custom dice, if you have plastic trays, a mold will need to be made for those. And so you have to count the cost of the mold in your actual manufacturing cost. Testing. So you're going to want to get, at the very least, European testing done. There's also testing for the US and testing for Australia. Testing for the US, as long as you've gotten your testing for Europe done and you don't have a lot of plastic in your game, testing for the US is usually not as needed. But as soon as you start getting into more items of having plastic, you're definitely going to want to get that US testing done. You're going to want to get Australian testing done if you plan on offering the game in Australia. So the more kinds of components you have and the more kinds of materials are reflected in the game, the more testing that you're going to need to get done. Transportation to the storage facility. So you're going to want to include all of those as additional costs to calculate your actual cost. So as an example, let's say you're getting 1,500 units made. The quoted price that the factory has given you is $525 per unit, which would be $7,875 total. However, you need to add into that a dice mold of $1,000, a plastic tray mold of $1,000, 8 miniatures, so you need a mold for that, about $7,000, around $5,000 transport, and about $800 of testing and certification. These are actually relatively accurate estimates of what these cost, just as an idea. That means your actual manufacturing cost is going to be around $22,675. And your actual per unit cost is $15.12. So you'll notice that all of these things are static costs. No matter how many units you make, these prices don't change. So this is where the pricing for quantity of games actually makes a big difference. And where games that are mini heavy, a lot of the time you'll only see them being made when they're being made in large quantities. Because the lower quantity you go, the higher cost overall you're going to be making your game. So now that you have your per unit cost, what is the MSRP of your game? The retail value of your game. And another way of saying this is, why on earth are board games so bloody expensive? The general rule is you need to do 4 to 6 times what your actual print cost is. And this may seem like you're really inflating the cost a lot. But the reality is, this is not actually inflating it that much at all. Because you have to worry about advertising, you have to worry about distributors, you have to worry about recovering all of your previous costs that you've already sunk in, such as artwork, supplies that you've purchased for prototyping, making prototypes up and sending them to reviewers, getting reviewers to actually review it, which some of them will cost money. Have a question here. An expense have to pay, is that if unique dice? Yes, unique dice. So if you have unique dice, you're going to be spending about $1,000 just for the mold. There are, realistically, that does actually depend on the material you're getting the dice made out of. If you're getting them made out of resin, the individual dice will cost more, but the mold costs significantly less. If you're getting them made out of acrylic, the individual dice cost very little, but the mold is very expensive. So if you're going for a low production amount, and a low production amount, I would consider anything 2,500 units or less. It's usually best for dice to go for resin because the mold is pretty cheap overall. It's actually only about $100 to $200. The dice are more than twice as much per unit, but it's still going to be cheaper overall. Standard dice, if it's a standard D6, some places will do a mold cost, some places will not. If it's a standard D6 with a custom font, then yes, it will require a mold cost. If you just tell them to put a D6 in, and you don't specify anything more than that other than the color that you want, then it shouldn't require a mold cost. So the last thing, of course, with the pricing that you're going to try and set up is that eventually you're going to want to try and get a profit off this. Eventually. Don't expect that for a while, though. So the first thing, advertising. So it's going to take you time to learn your audience, and that's going to take money to learn it in the first place. But once you learn your audience, on average, so this is the average cost for marketing, is 1 to 2, which means that for every $1 in advertising spend, you make $2 back. Distributors. So distributors will only purchase your games at 40% of what you set the MSRP at. They will not go higher than that. Some of them may actually say that they'll only go as high as 35%. The reason being that they will then turn around and sell it to a game store at 55% of MSRP. The other thing is you have to pay to ship to them. So whatever it costs to ship those cases to the distributor, you are paying for that. you're going to have all of your costs that you've already put in that you still need to get back. So art costs, you're not counting this in your unit cost. Prototyping, reviews, anything that you put money in prior to sending it to the manufacturer, you still need to get that money back eventually through this model. But the biggest thing is you can't price yourself out of the market. So what that means is you have to be able to look at similar styles of games, or even games that have a similar number of components, number of pieces, number of models, anything like that. Look at what they price themselves at and make sure you're never too high above that. Otherwise, you will be pricing yourself out of the market and people will not purchase your game because they will have a legitimate reason to say it's too expensive. So we're going to go through a few quick costing models here. So at the 4-time costing model. So 4 times your actual unit cost of $15.12 would be that you want to set MSRP somewhere around $60.48. If you set it right at that, that means the distributor is going to be purchasing it at most for $24.19. So when you take off your per unit cost from that, that means that you'll be only making $9.07 minus shipping, minus any other additional costs involved. Keeping in mind that shipping a case of product is probably going to cost you about that much. Average advertising costs. So at the 1 to 2 model, so for every $1 you put in, you're going to get $2 back. You're going to need to spend about $30.24 to sell a $60.48 game. Sorry, I missed when you typed that. Taking which into consideration earlier on. How costly the game will be? Well, you want to keep that in mind as early as possible, but you won't fully know how much it's going to cost until you have back the manufacturing quotes and everything like that. And even then, it's going to be an estimate until you get the actual bill. Or should I say actual bills for the manufacturing, the transport, the testing, all of that. So based on the ×4 model, you're going to be making at most $15.12 per game. Realistically less than that because there are always going to be additional costs. Yes, it can be very dangerous to design a game that's going to be very expensive, which is why when you're designing a game, usually you want to try and simplify the components as much as possible. So use cardboard as much as possible because then it doesn't have mold costs. Use cards as opposed to other methods of doing things as much as possible. The less variety of materials used in the manufacture of the game, the less the total manufacturing cost is going to be, because you're not going to be incurring additional things like mold costs. So I have the same one here for what the ×5 model is, and again at the ×6 model. So one of the big things that you might notice between all of these is that you're actually bringing in significantly less money than what you're selling it at. So whatever you're selling it at, you're bringing in a lot less money than that. So while the customer is going to see this, you are looking at less than this for each item that you sell. Okay, so before we go on to storage and fulfillment, any more questions on these slides? The costing model is probably one of the more complex slides that we have today. Yes, most games sell retail at around $30 to $40. So what you might notice with most games is that they either have primarily paper and cardboard components, or they're games that are very popular, and so they may have minis or custom dice, but you know that thousands of those games were made, and so the additional costs for the molds was able to be incorporated in a lot easier. As a perfect example, I'll just show you one thing here. Going back to this slide. So let's say that for this particular game, instead of 1,500 units, you're making 15,000 units. So how much does that affect your actual amount by? Well, you still have the $1,000 for the dice mold. You still have the $1,000 for the plastic tray, the $7,000 for the miniatures, well, actually at this point, it's going to be a lot higher for the transport. For that, it's going to be around 1,400 for the transport. And then testing and certification is going to stay the same still. So that will be $23,800 extra. But that's going to be across, 23,800. That's going to be across 15,000 games as opposed to 1,500. Which instead of increasing the cost of the game by almost $10, it's going to increase the manufacturing cost of the game by about $1.60. So when you're doing significantly larger quantities, all of these costs that don't change very much will have a significantly less impact on the game. And so a game that has a manufacturing value of, let's say, $684, if you do the ×5 model on that, that comes to $32.40. And that would be a game that has a custom mold, custom dice, 8 custom miniatures. The testing and certification done that it needs. So it has all of these things, but it can be set at a price significantly lower. And that was at the ×5 model, where at that same model, but at 1,500 units, you'd have to set it at $7,500, or $75, I mean, to be able to make a profit off of it. So when you're looking at making your own game, self-publishing your own game, one of the big things you always want to keep in mind is the more complexity you add in the types of components needed, the significantly higher you're setting the cost of that game at. So do what you can to try and simplify out the types of pieces that are going to be in the game. Because, going back again to this slide, let's say you've been quoted at $5.25 for the game. You have standard dice, no dice vault. You don't have a plastic tray, you have a cardboard tray. You have no miniatures, you have standees, so they're part of your punch-out boards. You still have the transport, and you still have the testing. But you've just knocked $9,000 off of the total manufacturing cost. So the less kinds of components that you put in, the cheaper you can make your actual manufacturing cost. Does that make sense to everyone? How many copies to purchase? So we'll get to that one. We'll get to that one in a second, actually. Okay. So self-publishing, fulfillment, and storage. So when you're getting to the point of you've already ordered your games, you're trying to figure out how you're fulfilling the games. You're thinking, oh, I can just have them all shipped to my house, or I can get them shipped to a storage unit and fulfill them all myself. There's some problems with that, however, that a lot of people don't realize. First one is that storing it at a fulfillment company and getting it shipped to them, it's actually going to cost you less than renting a storage unit. Because they have a warehouse. So they're only charging you for the specific floor space in that warehouse that you're using. Whereas a storage unit, you're paying for the entire storage unit. And because storage companies are there to make money off of the individual units, each square footage of unit is going to cost you more than square footage of floor space at a storage company. At a fulfillment company, your products are are automatically insured. The fulfillment company has insurance for everything in its building. Whereas if you're renting a storage unit, you're going to need to buy that insurance separately. You don't want to have someone break into the storage unit and damage your games, or a flood happen and run through and all of your games are destroyed. If you don't have the insurance, then there's nothing that you can do. It's just garbage. Whereas that insurance is already covered at a fulfillment company. They will have cheaper shipping rates than you can get. They do this as a business. They ship things every single day. So they've been able to negotiate better rates than you're going to get. And it doesn't matter if you're able to even go and negotiate better rates for a limited time from a shipping company. Some companies will allow you to do that for bulk shipments for a limited time. Even the reduced rate you can negotiate for that is still going to be higher than the standard rate a fulfillment company gets. Packages are automatically tracked. This can be very, very important because packages do go missing. Expect packages to go missing, and you need to know what's going on with them. You need to know when a customer emails you saying, I didn't get a game, that you can go back to the tracking information and say, oh, hey, it arrived at this address and it has your signature on it already, which is something that comes up quite a bit, actually, of people trying to get you to send them extra games. And this is very, very, very time consuming if you're trying to fulfill it all yourself. I know myself, I personally do not have the time to go out and pack a couple hundred boxes so that they aren't damaged during shipping. Bring them all down to the shipping company, get them all processed through. That will take days. I would much rather be working on either selling games or making the next game. So cut all of that time out. So what's it actually going to cost? Well, there's going to be a receiving and sorting fee. And this is going to be variable depending on the company that you're working with, depending on the size of the package that you have, so the games themselves, depending on how many different packages there are. So if you have like your core game and an expansion or stretch goals in other boxes, all of those different kinds of things, the more options there are included, more variety, obviously, the more expensive the receiving and sorting is going to be. The actual storage, and an average storage cost is going to be around $25 per pallet per month. So the pallet size is essentially going to be how most fulfillment companies base their storage fees off of, is how many pallets do you need to store. And the less that you have stored there, obviously, the less they're going to be charging. Also, if 70% of your games are out the door within the first couple weeks because they're all being fulfilled for a Kickstarter, you'll pay the full storage fee amount for month one, and then for the rest of the games, you'll probably be down to one pallet or less, as certain companies will charge partial pallet rates as well, for the rest of the time as you continue to sell the rest of your games. There's going to be a processing fee. So this is going to be for every package they send out, they're going to be adding on a processing fee. This is literally just to cover their own costs. And this will range depending on the company involved, the size of your game, whether or not it'll fit into what they consider a standard shipping box, how heavy it is. So if essentially their workers are saying the game is too heavy, they're going to charge you more for it. How awkward it is. So if it's a really long box, that's not going to be easily maneuverable. It's not going to be fitting in a standard shipping box. So it's going to range exactly based on the company and based on your product. And then the actual shipping cost. So usually how this works from a fulfillment company is once a month, they'll bill you for all of the shipping that they've done for you. And so you can get their shipping rates, their processing fees, storage fees, all of this information. You can request it up front from them. So you'll know what you're paying to begin with. Every single fulfillment company will be able to provide you with this information right off the bat. Any questions on self-publishing before we go on? Or on storage and fulfillment, I mean, sorry. We've got a bit more on self-publishing here.
Is there, with like the American print and play on demand sort of manufacturers, do you think those can be scaled up to maybe selling in a game store one day, or is there just not the testing and not the capability?
The captain is dead. That started as a print on demand and scaled up to being in game stores. So it does exist. That being said, it's not what normally happens. You have to be a game that really stands out, that people really, really like, and that you're able to market quite well for it to be able to work.
And he switched from Game Crafter to another manufacturer probably when he got big.
He switched as soon as he started getting regular orders in.
Thanks.
Okay, so additional costs to keep in mind. A website. You're going to want to have a place to send people to. You're going to want to have a place to sell your games off of after your Kickstarter or whatever crowdfunding platform you use. So you're going to need a website to do it with. You're going to have yearly hosting fees. You're going to have fees for the transactional service that you use. You're going to have per transaction fees. You're going to want to get backup and security features so that someone doesn't hack your website and delete the data or steal your customer data, as that will create many, many legal issues for you. You're going to need to build an audience. So in addition to your regular advertising costs to sell, you're going to need to spend money to find out what ads work for the audience that you have, or even finding the audience that will be interested in your game. You're going to need a variety of artwork, which is your creatives for these ads. You're going to need to consider adjusting this every few months as the market changes constantly. And you're going to want some sort of insurance. And this is going to depend on exactly the style of game that you're making and where you're physically located. And then you're going to need to understand that there is time involved in doing this. So once you get to the point where you are sending this to the manufacturer, you need to be willing to dedicate the time that's needed to be able to make this successful and to make this sell. Otherwise, the games are just going to be sitting in the storage facility, wherever that is, whether it's a fulfillment company or a storage unit, and they're not going to sell. So you need to be willing to spend the money and understand that whatever initial investment you put in prior to manufacturing, you are likely not going to be making fully back, and therefore not actually making profit on that game for around 3 years. As that is actually the average. So crowdfunding. And this is going to be getting into relating to that question of how many copies to purchase. So first off, crowdfunding during your Kickstarter or whatever platform you're using, this is going to be your full-time job while the campaign is running. There are going to be a lot of customer service questions coming your way. There's going to be a lot of advertising you need to do. You need to make it your focus. You can no longer successfully fund a crowdfunding project if your main avenue of advertising is telling people about your project in Facebook groups, at conventions, and other live events. That is no longer enough to make a project fun. So there's hundreds of crowdfunding projects launched each day, and at minimum, 20 other game projects are going to be launching on the various crowdfunding platforms. The Facebook algorithm itself has changed over the last few years. So when you post into a Facebook group, only 5 to 10% of the people that have joined that group are actually going to have that post show up on their feed. If they go directly to the Facebook group itself and start scrolling through, yes, they'll be able to find it. But most people rely on what they find on their Facebook feed. And only 5 to 10% of the people in that group are going to see what you post. The same thing applies to personal posts. It's a higher percentage. It goes up to about 15%. But 10 to 15% of your friends will have your post pushed onto their Facebook. So gone are the days where you post something and everyone who is a friend of yours or everyone who likes a specific page gets that information. Those days are completely gone. So you have to be aware of that. And the other thing is most of these groups have limits on the amount of time you're allowed to post. Usually it's once or twice relating to a crowdfunding campaign. So you are not going to hit the majority of that group's audience with a post. People are also very, very busy. So unless they have constant reminders about it, they are just going to plain forget. So if you don't have a mailing list, you will not succeed. So to calculate how many people you need on your mailing list, so calculate the number of backers you need to fund your project. You need 5 to 10 times more than that on your list. So if your funding goal is $20,000 and a pledge level is $50, you need about 400 people putting $50 in each to get to your $20,000 funding goal. So you need an actual audience of 2,000 to 4,000 people to actually fund your game. This means that you will need to spend the time building your audience. So Kickstarters that you see that launch and then that never get very far, that never have many people backing them, the reason they fail every single time is because they have not spent the time building this audience. Okay, so in relation to the question of how many copies do you purchase? So you funded successfully on your crowdfunding project. You've gone and worked with a pledge manager after the campaign, and you've gotten a few more pledges in. But let's say that right after the Kickstarter, you decide to send it to print. Okay, so let's say you have, going off the numbers here, 400 people exactly that backed your game. So the first thing is that anything under 1,000 units, there are a few exceptions, but in general, anything under 1,000 units is going to actually cost you a lot more to get manufactured than it's worth. The Indie Game Alliance, for anyone who signs up and joins it, they do have something set up with a manufacturer who is willing to do lower print runs at a lower price, but the majority of them are not. So that's something to keep in mind first off, is that under 1,000 units, the manufacturing cost is very expensive. Consider it 500 units costing twice as much as 1,000 units. So getting 1,000 units manufactured will be the same cost on average. So first off, go off of your audience. 400 is going to be really low, hard to judge. Let's say you have 700. At that point, I'd recommend going at least 1,000. Let's say you have 1,200 backers. Look at going 1,400, 1,500 units. Essentially think of it as whatever you're getting manufactured, or whatever, sorry, you've got orders for in your crowdfunding project. Consider that as 70 to 80% of what you want to manufacture, unless you have evidence that people are very interested in the game. Because the reality is most games get a single print run, and that's it. So unless you have evidence that you'll be able to sell more games, don't make too many more than what you know you have orders for. It will save you a lot of time in the long run and a lot of headaches in the long run. However, if you do have that evidence, go ahead and consider your manufacturing order to be 50%. Keep in mind that then once you go that route, you are going to be turning this into a part-time job, if not a full-time job. Okay, so attracting the attention of a publisher. So we have about 20 minutes left at this point. So we're going to be going through this next, the next few slides here a little bit quicker. Okay, so if you're interested in working with a publisher, first off, you need to be researching them. So do they accept submissions even? If they don't accept submissions, don't waste your time. Just move on. What is their reputation? Some publishers have a very good reputation. They're people you want to try and work with. Some publishers do not. And so if you ask about their reputation, ask about a specific publisher, and you are consistently getting bad information about them, stay away from them. If you're getting one or two, that's not enough information to go off of to judge, because you're always going to find some people that have a negative opinion about any publisher for whatever reason. So one or two bits of information that are negative, not enough to go off of. Consistent negative information tells you to stay away from that specific publisher. How do they accept submissions? So this is going to be either email or in person. So usually this information can be found on their website, on their mailing list, different things like that. So again, do research. Find out how they want to be contacted. If it's in person, that means at a convention. How many games they put out a year? So every single publishing company is going to have a backlog of games they're working on. So if they're a company that puts out a lot of games, keep in mind that they're going to be able to get to your game quickly. They're usually going to be looking for more games. If they're a company that only puts out 1 or 2 games per year, they're already going to have at least 2 or 3 games on backlog. So they may not be looking for a game, or they're going to be a lot more picky of the specific kind of game that they're looking for. Also, look for publishers that put out similar styles of games to the game that you've already made. They're going to be more inclined to look at your game because they already know the audience to advertise to. They don't need to find a new audience. Make an amazing sell sheet. So the sell sheet is what they're going to be walking away with, and they're going to be looking at and remembering your pitch about. So make the sell sheet a prime focus for you. Spend the time practicing your pitch. So annoy your friends with it. Annoy your family with it. Get it down If it's going to be an email submission, then get everyone you know to look over it and make sure that it makes sense, it's clear, it's interesting, it's not too long. As a publisher, nobody wants to look through an entire huge wall of text. They won't. So make sure it's short, it's interesting, and it gives all the information needed about it. Again, do your research. So it's worthwhile trying to get one manufacturing quote for your game at this point. Because then if they have questions for you about it, regarding how much you think it's going to cost to manufacture, what kinds of components are needed, issues that come up, a manufacturer in their quote they send back to you will likely highlight these things for you already. And so that is one very quick way to get the information you need. Getting a quote from a manufacturer doesn't cost anything, so use that resource. Write a project proposal. So this is something that very few people do. And there is a template that is available for download. I believe it was sent out already. I will also be posting a link to it in the Facebook group. Essentially, it's just quickly highlighting the important information about your game, but putting it in a more concise manner and putting it in a way that shows that you've done some basic information relating to them and relating to the game you've made. What this does is it just puts you up above other people who are putting in submissions. It makes the publisher remember you more. Not all publishers are going to want this, but for the ones that do want it, it will make you stand out a lot more. The reason you need to stand out is because of how many games are actually being published every year. There are about 7,000 board games released every year around the world. And publishers are only actually looking for the top 1% to be their next games they put out. So most publishers are going to pass on your game. They are going to be looking for something very specific. They're going to be looking for something that fits within a niche they're already working with, an audience they already have, or just something that absolutely and utterly wows them. That being said, they're most likely going to provide you feedback. This feedback might be quite negative. Don't take it negatively, though. Because this feedback, if they're taking the time to give you feedback, they are actually trying to help you. So what was the feedback about your presentation? So they're just simply telling you to adjust how you're doing your presentation. That's all they're saying. Adjust how you're doing your presentation, sell yourself more. So adjust it and try again. This can even be, in a few more months, try again with the same publisher. Did they give you feedback about the mechanics? So even if you feel your game plays properly as you think it should, the publisher's experience is telling them there's something about your game and the way the mechanics are implemented that is not quite right. So look at it very carefully what they're telling you. This doesn't necessarily mean you actually need to change it, but they're telling you something you need to focus on looking at very carefully. Are they talking about your theme? If they're talking about the theme of your game, and that there's an issue with it, then they are flat out telling you the theme doesn't match the game. So you're going to need to look at what other themes might match the game you've made. Complexity. If they're talking about how complex the game is, they have a reason to be worried. Publishers see lots and lots and lots of games. If they feel the game is too complex, they know that a good portion of their audience is going to feel the game is too complex. If they're asking you questions about who you believe the audience for the game is, that means they're worried that the game might not have a big enough audience. It could be that they are looking for more information from you to make sure you've done your research. But if you're unsure of the specific audience, or if they're telling you that they don't believe the audience you've said would actually be interested in the game, that means that there may not actually be an audience for the game you've made. And that is hard feedback to take. But there are many games that are made that do not actually have an audience for them. Okay, so you've gotten through your pitches, you've talked to several publishers, you find a publisher that is very interested in your game. Oh, I have one comment here. I was told with one game that the market was too saturated with that theme. Yes. There are some games that you simply cannot market right now because it costs too much. Because you're competing against not just board games, but you're competing against video games as well. You're competing against mobile games. You're competing against books on that theme. You're competing against all too many things. And when you're competing against too many things, the market cost jumps up as much as 20 times. So if you can't market the game and make a profit, then you can't sell the game. So if the publisher is interested, they're going to want to start contract negotiations with you. Depending on the publisher, the royalty they offer is going to be over a very wide range, between 2 and 10%, with your average being between 4 and 6. The bigger the publisher, the smaller percentage they're going to offer you. This doesn't mean you're making less money. In fact, usually with a bigger publisher, even at a lower percentage, you're going to be making more money in the long run than with a smaller publisher that offers you a bigger percentage. Essentially, it comes down to the volume of games they're going to sell. So 10% royalty sold of 1,000 games is not going to be the same of a 2% royalty sold for 50,000 games. So you need to be able to look at how big the publisher is, how many games they're realistically going to be able to make of that game. And that'll give you an idea of what royalty you really want to be negotiating for. You always want to try and get the royalty on gross sales. So this is right off the top of the sale that you're getting the royalty of. This is going to be the most beneficial for you. And some of the other ways that royalties can be calculated can actually be very aggressive and can be quite negative towards you. For instance, on the little side sheet here, it shows you avoid net profits. So net profits is literally you're getting the percentage of royalty off of the percentage of profit the company is making. It is very, very easy to maneuver numbers around to show zero profit. So never, never, never negotiate for net profit, and never negotiate for work for hire. This is something you've worked on. You should get a proper royalty for it. Get information to their sales numbers. So get it put into the contract to have access to the reports and that you get reports sent to you. Request right to review and right of refusal. So if you're signing a contract with them, the game is theirs. They can do what they want with it. And that includes completely changing the theme around, putting it into something that you don't even like, that you don't agree with at all. But it is their game. They have the rights to it at that point. What right to refusal does is it gives you the right to have your name taken off. If it is something that you have legitimate reasons to not want to be associated with once it's published, make sure you have the right to refuse your name being put on that product. You're still going to be getting the royalties off it, but you won't be associated with it. Okay, so in conclusion, self-publish if you wish to gain more experience in the industry. Self-publishing is a great way to gain experience in the industry. It is going to be a lot of hard lessons, but you will gain a lot of experience doing it. If you're willing to lose money if you're unsuccessful. So if you don't successfully fund, any money that you've put in up to that point will be lost. If you're willing to take the risk of losing all the investment you've made up to that point, then self-publishing is worthwhile for you. If you have another source of income, don't consider this your full-time job. But you do need to keep in mind that it is still going to take time. So you have to have the time to put towards it. If you're willing to make self-publishing a part-time business, not everyone's willing to do that, and they're still willing to self-publish, but keep in mind that there is a lot of extra work needed than most people realize. Speak with a publisher if designing is the hobby for you. You don't want to go to all the effort, all the time, all the financial input needed to actually go the full self-publishing route. You don't want to eventually start a small business. Keep in mind that self-publishing, you are essentially creating a small business at that point, plain and simple. So if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to take on the liability that that involves, then speak with a publisher. And if you're curious about what that liability is, go down to your local city hall and ask what is needed to start a small business in your community. That'll give you the basic information and where the potential liabilities are of starting a small business. Speak with a publisher if you just want to create things. Self-publishing takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of time and energy away from making. So if your love is in the making, but not in everything that comes after, talk with a publisher. So, if at this point you're thinking, I don't think I can make any money making games, why should I even continue making games? The reason is because you're making games because you enjoy it. You should never be approaching this from the standpoint of, I'm making games to make money. Very few of us make money in this industry. You should be making games because you love making games. And if you're making games because you love making games, you're going to be more passionate about the game you're making. The more passion you have in the game you're designing, this will help you make a better game. The better game you make, the more likely you are to be published. So the very, very first thing you need is to enjoy what you're doing in the first place. If you're not enjoying it, stop now. But if you are enjoying it, keep enjoying it. Keep making games because you enjoy it, and you will make better games because of it. So, do we have any questions on that very, very in-depth and very, very deep topic that we had today?
I have a question about, so with going to a publisher, I know that there are some smaller publishers, people who like they produce a couple games a year, but they're very independent, and they do let you keep your art. What is, I guess, is that sort of just like splitting where it's almost self-publishing because they're still using Kickstarter and all that, but they just have the avenues? Or like what is the size, I guess, that you'd say, like from small publisher where it's like a 1 or 2 person team to like an actual like larger company?
Think of a small publisher versus large publisher as in if they do Kickstarters, how many units are they selling on their Kickstarters? If they have a large library of games versus a small library of games. If they are a big name. Different things like that. That'll all tell you whether or not they're a large publisher or a small publisher. And that will also indicate how much revenue they have to work with for putting out the next game.
Like, would you expect even a smaller publisher to put those upfront costs for the inspection and all of that sort of like fulfillment process? Or would that also be like a partnership where you would just then take it, like it would just affect your profit versus that?
Even a small publisher, I'd be expecting that they'd be covering all the upfront costs.
Okay.
Any more questions this evening? Oh, yeah. Oh. Okay. Well, in that case, it looks like we're at right around the hour-and-a-half mark. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining the 4-part course here on publishing and making your own games. If you have more topics that you're interested in, feel free to bring them up in the Facebook group. And if we have enough interest in even more topics, the course can be extended at a later point as well. Thank you very, very much for joining us for the course. And I hope everyone managed to find some useful information in it for all of you. And I hope that you continue making games. So keep making games, keep having fun at doing it, everyone. Thank you very much.